Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Struggle Session. Yes, we are back. I am your host, Leslie Lee III. I'll be joined later by my co-host, Jack Allison. Thank you all so much for your support and your patience over these past couple of very hard months for me personally, because I think, as you all know, I'm dealing with long COVID. It put me out of my day job. It really got in the way of Struggle Session. But it's summer. I'm feeling a little bit better, feeling a little bit more up to it, and we're going to keep rocking and rolling here on Struggle Session. Thank you all so much for your support. The great kind messages and emails I've gotten. All of you who checked out the charity stream that my good friend Katie Halper did with a bunch of other great folks. I'll include the link in the show notes if you haven't seen it, because it's an all-star cast of guests. Will Miniker, Matt Chrisman, Jamie Peck, Tom from Trillbillies, tons of great people. Thank you everyone who donated or subscribed to the Patreon, which you can find the link for in the show notes. You can also subscribe. Thank you to everyone who listens to us on the public feed at Spreaker, at Spotify, YouTube. Oh yeah, we got stuff on YouTube now too, so you can listen to us there. Thank you all for sharing the show with your friends, giving us those 5-star reviews on iTunes or wherever. Again, I really appreciate all your support and your help. I wouldn't have made it, me and my family, YB, Taco, and Spike, we wouldn't have made it through this without all of your help and support, and I'll always be appreciative of that. Also, I've been really appreciative of the messages and emails I've gotten. So please, if you don't mind, send me an email at thestrugglesession@gmail.com if you like. It may take me a while to get back to you. The answering emails is one of the things that long COVID makes really tiring and frustrating, but I do read them and I really do appreciate them. And one more bit of business before we get into today's episode. You can find me, as well as Struggle Session, on Threads right now. I know you got Blue Sky out there, you got Spill, but Threads was the one where people could actually sign up. So I'm on there, the Leslie Lee III. I guess someone already has a Leslie Lee III III account on there. So I'm the Leslie Lee I have to suffer that indignity, as well as Struggle Session. It is at the Struggle Session on Threads. I'll be posting some more stuff there, not to help, Zuck, but just to see Musk humble. Yes, this is a spite social media platform, and I think that's a lot healthier than the other reasons we've been on these social media apps. But that's enough about that. Today's episode, I'm very excited about. I'm so excited you finally get to hear it. It took me a while to get it out, but here it is. Today, we're diving into our old pal Damon Lindelof and an excerpt about him, Carlton Cuse, and racist things they got up to behind the scenes at Lost. It puts a lot of things in perspective, but I think one of the things it especially puts in perspective is what you're about to hear, which is one of Damon Lindelof's acceptance speeches at the Emmy Awards. You know, the one where Watchmen won like everything for being a politically forward-thinking black show. It's a little bit long, but it's worth getting through before we get into the meat of the show. Thank you so much again for listening. Remember, hit up sesh.show for all the links to subscribe to our show ad-free. Thank you to all our subscribers. Thank you so much. I am so happy to be back. We got some good stuff cooking for you. On with the show.
And the Emmy goes to Watchmen!
We all tested, I swear. Thank you to the Academy for this incredible recognition, to our fellow nominees, to Alan Moore and Dave Gibbons and Ta-Nehisi Coates for their inspiration, to HBO and Warner Brothers for their unblinking support, to our partners, our spouses, and our children. Thank you, Hetty and Van, who tolerated our absence and enabled our presence. And thank you to every single person who invested 9 hours of their life into Watchmen. I knew this was never my story to tell, and the only reason I'm standing here now is because of the people who are standing alongside me, the ones who are zooming and zapping in from around the world. They told their stories, and it is one of the great honors of my life to accept on their behalf, and I'd like to share what I've learned from them along the way. History is mystery. It is broken into a million puzzle pieces, and many are missing. We know where those pieces are, but we don't seek them out because we know finding them will hurt. Sometimes we cause that hurt. Maybe we even benefited from it, but we have to name it before we can repair it. Be careful, be clumsy, run hot, stay cool, be the bull in the china shop, pick up what you broke and glue it back together. Don't stop until it's great. Affirm, it's never great enough. Dissent, be consistent, embrace paradox, never contradict yourself. And finally, stop worrying about getting canceled and ask yourself what you're doing to get renewed. We dedicate this award to the victims and survivors of the Tulsa Massacre of 1921. The fires that destroyed Black Wall Street still burn today. The only way to put them out is if we all fight them together. God bless, stay safe, and thank you for this. I'm gonna go throw up.
It's here. You hear what I'm telling you? In my mind, I created it. I built you. I created it, and it's real. Don't you understand?
Well, hello everyone. Welcome back to Struggle Session. How's it going? Thank you so much for joining us today. I am your host, Leslie Lee III, and as always, I'm joined by Jack Allison. Jack, how's it going, buddy?
We have to go back, apparently. Apparently, we have to go back. But
Oh, God.
I'm fine.
I did not expect it, even though we got hints, in the past few months that we would be doing another dive into Damon Lindelof, Jack. And, I'm not here to gloat, all right? I'm here because it's our responsibility, because this is not a joke. I think we did the best Damon Lindelof podcast that there's ever been. Watching Watchmen was dope. Lots of great guests. We dived really deep, and we weren't really trying to bag on Damon Lindelof. We were just trying to analyze the show and go along, and as critics, right?
Yeah.
We approached it, and we actually said, if you listen to the early episodes, we said we expected to like this because people who behind the scenes had told us, oh no, this thing is good.
Yeah. I in some ways, I'm even like, I think it'll be good to go through this article, and I do think the article's really fucked up and everything like that. But there is the part of me that is like, what I don't like about Damon Lindelof, and that has changed, after reading this article. I think that there's a lot of fucked up shit, and I do think that he's like kind of emblematic of a time in Hollywood that, has changed but hasn't really changed, I think, and we'll talk about it as we get into it. But yeah, there's the part of me that's like, really what I don't like about Damon Lindelof is the work. You know what I mean? Like, really, it's like, I don't like Watchmen, and I don't like Watchmen because of problems within the work. I don't like Lost because of problems within the work. I think he's overrated. Leftovers, I do think is fine, but I think it's maybe overrated. But yeah, that's even kind of like in a lot of ways, I'm like, I certainly don't see it as gloating. You know what I mean? Because like, I think that I still feel frustrated by people's sort of like refusal to engage with what Watchmen was really about. You know what I mean? And like,
Well, the thing about Watchmen now is really relevant now because the title of this episode is Damon Lindelof Racist, okay? And look, the reason why I kind of went hard on Watchmen, because it was a show promoted as being more than a show. It was a show promoted as being something like a concrete, like an act of racial justice being done on the behalf of black folks.
It was reparations. We don't need them anymore. We don't need them anymore because we have the Watchmen show.
You can read my article on this on the Watchmen show. I don't want to get all into it, but the way that all was presented, not necessarily by fans, right? Like fans, they don't know. They like the show. They learned about the Tulsa massacre from the show. That's all well and good. regular
Although
fans.
in some
fine.
ways, not to belabor it, but in some ways, it's weird to have this thing where we're like, we learned about the Tulsa Massacre in a show where superheroes exist. Because like in
Yes.
some ways, I'm like, does that make you think maybe it didn't happen? But whatever, we'll move. We'll go aside from that.
I've read a lot of posts about Damon Lindelof and Watchmen the past week prepping for this, but there were people saying that that their friends watched it and said that after watching, they said, "Oh no, the Tulsa that couldn't have possibly happened. That's too unrealistic." After watching the Watchmen episode,
I mean,
about
like, yeah,
the Tulsa Massacre.
there is the part of me that's like, everyone's like, people learned about the Tulsa Massacre from this show, and I'm like, yeah, but there's also like a man made of nuclear energy, and so is that maybe maybe they should have done it as a documentary if the aim was to teach people about the Tulsa Massacre. But anyway, that's an aside.
As an aside, and you can go back into our old episodes at patreon.com/struggle session or sesh.plus or strugglesession.substack.com. We got a whole back catalog there. I promise you the Watchmen series is worth going back for. But getting back to here. So all of this, and I talked about this before, Jack, I basically ignored the existence of Damon Lindelof until the Watchmen show came out. I watched maybe the first few episodes of Lost. I didn't when I went to go see like the Star Trek movies, I didn't know he wrote them or Prometheus. He was just not on my radar as like a person at all. And so some of the revelations in this article are really shocking to me because but particularly the things that happened with Harold Perrineau. How could people who were TV critics around for Lost, people who were in the media around for Lost, not mention any of this shit when they were promoting Damon Lindelof as like the woke savior, when the stuff with Harold actually was pretty public from what I understand. At least that's how the article paints it.
There was definitely stuff in interviews, certainly. But I even remember, as someone, I did watch Lost, and I was kind of a like Lost watcher, like kind of hating it as I watched it from like sort of season 2 onward. So I wasn't really like I like Lost is what made me not like Damon Lindelof, because I got like hooked into that show and I was like, oh, they didn't know what the fuck they were doing and this show sucks, But even aside, from what Harold Perrineau said in interviews, it was pretty obvious just from like watching the show that they fucked up his storyline. Like there were things being set up there, and then he basically disappears. And Walt, the son on the show, ostensibly just is kidnapped and disappears until the final season, and so even even just as a viewer, I do think like critically, a very weird thing happened around Lost, which is that the critics, there was this thing about like trying to theory craft about what the show was like doing, and so much of the criticism around Lost was not criticism, it was like fan fiction, and that was like part of the whole Lost ecosystem. But so I'm like, in some ways, I'm like, I wonder, if the show didn't really receive criticism because this kind of weird fanfic thing was standing in for it, and was extremely popular. It was like a popular part of the show. Like people got, would have tons and tons of readers for their weird fanfic, criticism things. But yeah, like even as a viewer of the show, I think it was kind of clear that like Harold Perrineau was done dirty, and that the two sort of main black characters on the show from the beginning, kind of just disappeared. And then as the article gets into, there's another black character that got added to the show who was also kind of done pretty dirty on the show.
Yeah, I'm actually shocked when reading that article that there were only like literally 3 black characters on Lost. That's like sub Friends numbers. Like Friends gets a lot of shit for not having a lot of black people in it, but that's actually like really, really bad, kind of bad.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, and it is funny too because I do think Lost kind of at the time, or maybe in sort of maybe it's more retrospective, but it gets credit for being kind of a very diverse show. Just because I think I don't know. I guess TV was just extremely white, and so that they had anybody at all that wasn't white. But yeah, as the article gets
if you
into...
ask me, like right now, Jack, as someone who just was casually, a viewer of Lost, I was like, oh yeah, they got a pretty diverse cast. They had Michelle Rodriguez, they had Henry Kim, they had all these people. But what you're telling me from the show and from reading the article, like it really did become about the white.
They were not the
main
focus.
White characters.
They were not the focus. They were kind of all the supporting cast, and a lot of times, like plot-wise, were kind of done dirty, But also, the show was just bad. On top of that, and it was a sloppily written bad show, that had no plan from the beginning, and even aside from the sort of weird race stuff and the credit it got, like it just was a far worse show than people want to admit, kind of.
Yeah. All right, and so this article is interestingly enough written by someone I think you could probably say was a friend of Damon Lindelof's, or at least, I think so. At
Maureen
least
Ryan, it seems clear in the article. I mean, she is like a sort of very insider, Hollywood writer, lady, and I know her work very well. And yeah, it's clear from like the sort of tone of how she's talking to Damon that they have a pretty friendly relationship.
And it still lights him on fucking fire. We kind of felt that something was coming because for some reason Damon Lindelof's been promoting this new streaming show on Peacock,
the Nun show, whatever.
Yeah, Mrs. Davis. I will say it's the first couple episodes seemed pretty interesting, but like that's where all the budget went. YB was watching it, and I watched it behind him. I think YB liked it, but when I saw those later episodes, I was like, oh, it's just people talking in rooms again. It's back to streaming TV. But the first couple episodes might be worth the watch. And funnily enough, he did not name himself showrunner, quote unquote, of the show Mrs. Davis, which was kind of odd. Like he did a lot of press for it. It was his idea, but he was not the showrunner. And it was a little odd, especially since he was following up Watchmen, which got tons of critical acclaim, won all those Emmys, etc., etc. Like you would think people would be kind of hungry for the next, Damon Lindelof joint. Here's a couple of quotes, and I think we talked about them on the show when they happened. He was just asked about a random question about like being a showrunner and toxic spaces in general, like not him specifically, but he's like, there's been writers' room that historically have toxic spaces. What do you do to, avoid that? How you write those wrongs? Like a really softball question. And he kind of comes out and admits that, like, I want to make it very clear that I don't distinguish myself from those showrunners. I was one of the people that you're describing. Unsolicited. It was very
like Maureen had already been talking to him.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
Exactly.
Like, this book was already happening. Like he knew that this was going to come out. You know what I mean? So it's like, in some ways, and we'll talk about this later, but in some ways, and I don't want to make excuses for Damon, and I'm not actually. I do think that in all times in his career, he's like trying to act the way he thinks you're supposed to act. You know what I mean? Like, I think even when he was doing Watchmen, he's just trying to fit in to what the cultural moment of time is. And in some ways, I'm like, he's just a chameleon, man. Like, he didn't admit that he ran a toxic, workplace because he like felt guilty about it or like wanted to like, change the culture. He said it because he knew this article was going to come out, and he's like already trying to chameleon himself into being having the right opinion publicly about it. You know what I mean?
The contrite guy, the contrition guy.
In this article, there's plenty of racist stuff in this article, and it's unforgivable. You know what I mean? But in some ways, I'm like, this is still Damon trying to like be the sort of creatively libertine showrunner type of guy that he like saw in other people and wanted to be like I'm not, again, I really am not making excuses for him, but I am like, I think Damon is a fucking chameleon. You know what I mean? I think he just is trying to fashion himself into whatever is on vogue for the moment. That's what Watchmen is. That's what this behind the scenes bullshit is about. That's what it's about now, with him even trying to be contrite. He just wants to script for himself that he's a showrunner guy in whatever the modern version of Hollywood is.
Ooh, Jack Allison Mindhunter. I see it just a little bit more cynically. I think he is just the fucking asshole guy, and him shifting to Watchmen and making this very allegedly pro black show was him kind of trying to whitewash his past, because this show did come out around after Me Too happened, and a lot of people in Hollywood were getting in a lot of trouble, even things similar to what Damon Lindelof is in trouble for now. So I'd see it a little bit more as like kind of but it could be both.
But in some ways, I'm like, I actually don't think these interpretations are mutually exclusive. You know what I mean? Like, I do think that even what you're talking about, like it being post Me Too and we're re-evaluating everything, like that still is him sort of like trying to fit the modern cultural thing. And yes, he might have done it with slightly more awareness of what was in his past and what might have come out about him or whatever. But yeah, I guess I'm like, I mean, I think we both agree that, what
six of one, half dozen of another.
What he did with Watchmen was not because he was like a strong believer, in this like sort of ideologically, you know what I mean?
Yeah, but to both our points, people have said a lot. Yes, there have been Lindelof defenders saying that, Watchmen wasn't just him trying to improve or change. It's proof that he did. Already, like this article is already kind of a moot point because Lindelof's already done. He's already done the work.
He's done the work. He read Ta-Nehisi Coates, and he did a whole TV show about how we should have black cops who shouldn't be afraid to use their guns.
Yes. All right. So we've been talking around this for a while now. We can dive into the article, and again, you can read this at Vanity Fair, and the article is again a part of a book that Maureen Ryan is putting out called "Burn It Down," which I'm very excited to read. It's very interesting to see an insider kind of write a book that is torching people who are still very, very powerful. I'm sure.
I also do sort of agree with the thesis of the book, which is that like it's not even necessarily about the bad men. It is about the superstructure. It's about how this thing of like people get put in charge of shows and they have no fucking training about how to like run a business. You know what I mean? It's the weirdest
thing. Or manage people,
manage
work with
people. Yeah, exactly. Like they have no idea how to do it. And in fact, there's been a lot that's been passed down as like being sort of like celebrating people for doing it in insane and like toxic ways. You know what I mean? Which I do think is interesting. I think that's interesting.
All right, so the article we're not going to read a lot of the beginning of it, but I just want to lay the groundwork here. We've been using the word showrunner a lot. Nobody knew what that word was. Well, maybe some people did, but it wasn't as commonly used when Lost started than now. Like that was not like, it wasn't at a certain point, it was not like a job title.
Well, it actually, by the way, isn't a job title. We've talked about this maybe before, but like it's a fake designation that they give to one writer producer on the show that isn't a credit, doesn't exist as a job title, but yes, it is something that people are able to put in their Twitter bio. But really, when we're talking about a showrunner, we're talking about a writer-producer who is kind of in charge of the writer's room.
Joss Whedon recently is a showrunner that got canceled, but he's still trying to make his way back. His fans fairly early on turned against him when the first revelations came out about like him just cheating on his wife, right? And it wasn't even like he was still working in Hollywood when I think we talked about it in like 2017, right? Like
something like that.
And so the fans immediately were kind of like Whedon-esque, the message board named after him. They immediately put a post saying, "Fuck Joss Whedon, he fucking sucks," and that should be the approach everyone has to anyone whose job is just making television. But for some reason, Damon Lindelof got this tag that we reserve for actual artists. Genius. Genius, Jack. If you search Damon Lindelof genius, you will actually find a lot of prominent people. In fact, former CNN anchor Jake Tapper.
Oh no, he's still a CNN anchor.
He's still there.
Yeah, he's still on.
Oh, he's still there.
You're thinking of like the guy, whatever, doesn't matter.
So many of those guys have gotten fired for one reason. We could do a whole episode on them too. But
he's sticking in. He's not, he's not Chris Cuomo. He's not Don Lemon. He's a barnacle.
So he tweeted out how pissed he was that Disney had fired had fired Damon Lindelof from his Star Wars movie, not knowing that this is the reason why. And like the idea that someone who makes just entertaining TV and even network TV is a genius is so preposterous to me. Like, Dick Wolf is not a genius. He's a guy who knows how to make shows that you want to sit down and turn your brain off and watch. And that's what TV mostly is. But when you had the era of prestige, and the article talks about Battlestar Galactica, Breaking Bad, all these shows kind of coming out, and the network TVs trying to keep up with this, and Lost probably being one of the best examples of like a prestige network TV show. All of this stuff is like, when we put those prestige labels on the shows, when we say these people are geniuses, that lets them get away with fucking anything when they're just like pieces of shit. Like, when you reading this article, when it gets into like how they behave, it's just like, these are people who were fucking nerd-ass pussies in high school, nerd-ass pussies in college, and as soon as they got a little power, they started abusing as many black people and women as they could.
Yeah, and like I said, I do think that this is, and I think that probably the Maureen Ryan book will go into this, is that this, like, is like sort of, in a very ugly way, like a cultural thing about writers' rooms. Like, I do think that there was this kind of bizarre hazing of extremely nerdy people hazing other extremely nerdy people, and kind of everybody kind of trying to show off about how, creatively libertine they are and how much nothing offends them. You know what I mean? Like, and yeah, I don't know. But yeah, maybe we should get into some of the individual things in the article.
Yeah. So, this is a quote from one of the people who worked on the show. And as you said, Jack, I can only describe it as hazing. It was a very much middle school and relentlessly cruel. I've never heard that much racist commentary in one room in my career. So it wasn't just like, the unspoken bias, right? That you get the training, HR training for. This was like explicit, racist jokes and comments, like, and then constant, and it's not like a camaraderie thing, right? Because Jack, you've worked in Hollywood. I think you can tell me that, generally speaking, it's not the most professional place, and a lot of inappropriate comments might be made that people may brush off because we're all friends here. It's not that big a deal. We're just making movies, right?
For sure. And I do think that that's like changed a little bit. But again, like, sometimes, like, I don't know if it's changed because any people have become better people, or if they're all just sort of doing what they think is expected of them. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like, I was in rooms like before, like, Trump got elected and before Me Too, and people were throwing around lots of shit you wouldn't expect to hear in a workplace, and yeah, I don't know. When I read this article, it felt very familiar to me.
Yeah, but the article does say that even on Lost, it was worse than.
It
like
sounds
the
a little
base
extreme.
level.
It does.
Yeah, it was even worse than that. And
there was a lot of this shit though. Like, there was so much of this, and I do think it was a cultural thing in Hollywood to show how cool you were by being the least offended you could possibly be. And now I think that things have shifted, and it's like kind of about showing how you're the most offended person in the room, and that and you're a good person because of that.
So the article started off with what Harold Perrineau went through. And at the time the show started, right, he was like the biggest actor on the show, right? Certainly, I think it's fair to say he's probably like by far the best actor on the show. I haven't watched all of it, but he's an amazing actor. He's been in a ton of stuff. He was in, big TV movies. Like, he was in the fucking Matrix, like, he was a big kind of deal at the time, and they recruited him for the show.
He was Link in the Matrix, yeah.
Yeah, they recruited him for the show with the promise that he was going to have a big part in it. But that's not what happened.
Yeah, he's quoted in the article. He says, "It became pretty clear that I was the black guy. Daniel Day Kim was the Asian guy, and then you had Jack and Kate and Sawyer." And then, he later he says, still, they recalled comments like, "Nobody cares about these other characters. Just give them a few scenes on another beach." And so basically, Carlton Cuse and Damon Lindelof, kind of made it the Jack, Kate, and Sawyer show. And then, Perrineau remembers being told, well, this is just how audiences follow stories, and that those were the characters that were relatable.
And yes, we haven't mentioned Carlton Cuse that much lately, just because he's worse than Damon. We'll say that he's a lot worse than Damon.
Yeah.
He's a much worse person.
I mean,
than him.
But in some ways, I would be like, he's like old school Hollywood and Damon's new school Hollywood. You know what I mean?
Yeah, so it's somewhat more offensive.
Yeah, like he is basically like in this article, especially toward the end, he basically is just like, I contest every single story, and I don't believe that any of it is true. And Damon does the more modern thing where he's like, well, I don't remember this, but I have no reason to believe anyone would lie about me, and so I'm going to listen and learn.
Yeah, there's more mentions about the fact that when they were doing photo shoots, the characters of color would have to stand in the back. And the justification that people heard, Perrineau said he was told that this is just how audiences follow stories, and those characters were relatable, meaning the white characters. Was it Sawyer,
Kate, and Jack?
Isn't Kate Evangeline Lilly like MAGA actress?
I think she's perhaps just anti-vax.
Perhaps she's anti-vax.
She's just one of the many Marvel actors who's quietly anti-vax, and for some reason we don't talk about that. And where it gets worse with Perrineau, versus Daniel Day Kim and the other characters on the show, they're kind of being pushed to the side. But with Perrineau, he's playing Michael, who's on the island with his son, and these are the two sort of main black characters. And there's a moment in the first or second season where basically Walt, his son, gets taken away by the nefarious others on the island. And he tells this story basically, of that this was a Sawyer episode. The way Lost was structured is it had flashbacks to, one of the characters, and sort of the on-island story, also featured that character. And so in this episode, his son is kidnapped, and he describes basically the way they wrote the script, like his character doesn't really react to it. And that the next scene is him just talking to Sawyer about one of his own things. And, he recalls, talking to Damon Lindelof and Carlton Cuse about this, sort of being like, I just don't want to, he says, I don't want to further the narrative, that black men don't care about their sons. He says, I just can't have this father not care about his son. Can we put in some more lines that show he cares about his son? They didn't. I ad-libbed some lines. I didn't give a shit at that point. Weeks later, he got a revised script. The flashbacks were now about Michael's pre-island life. He had 2 days to shoot those scenes as opposed to the several days devoted to the Sawyer flashbacks. It was long, 14, 18-hour days. And he kind of, says that he got the sense they were trying to sabotage him. He was like, if you think I'm going to fuck this up, I'm not. I'm going to be really good. So weirdly, he asks them about it. They oddly, almost aggressively give him what he asks for. And then at the end of the season, they tell him he won't be coming back. And so Perrineau says, I was fucked up about it. I was like, I just got fired, I think. I was like, wait a minute, what's happening? Cuse said, well, you said to us, if we don't have anything good for you, you want to go. I was just asking for equal depth. According to Perrineau, the response from Cuse was, well, you said you don't have enough work here, so we're letting you go. I observed the royal. This is now Maureen Ryan talking. She says, I observed that the response seemed to indicate royal displeasure. Perrineau agreed. It was very much like, how dare you?
Yeah. So, and that's a recurring theme in the show is like when the actors did ask for more, like they weren't just told no, they were like punished, like aggressively gone after. It's also mentioned earlier on that there was the first kind of issue that they had was about pay and how all the actors were paid very differently. At a certain point, they tried to band together to do what the cast of Friends did, where they said you have to pay us all the same amount of money. And instead, they just came up with a tier system for the different actors.
A race-based
and only
tier.
only white actors were in the top tier.
Yeah, so but we actually skipped over something that I thought was interesting is that when he did talk to Damon and Carlton Cuse, he said this is just furthering the narrative that nobody cares about black boys, even black fathers. And he says that was the thing that was always tricky. Anytime you mention race, everybody their hair gets on fire, and they're like, "I'm not racist," And I do feel like that was kind of really what Perrineau got fired for here, because if we, skip to a little bit later in the article, Maureen Ryan writes, finally, when Perrineau's lost departure came up, this is in the writer's room, Lindelof said, according to multiple sources, that the actor called me racist, so I fired his ass. And
I mean, plain as day. Plain as day. That's just so pathetic. Like, that is fucking Revenge of the Nerds shit. Like, this great actor who you begged to be on the show, you promised to give him equal time, and you did not do so. And then when he just reasonably asked for more, like, it's
not really even asking
writing
for more. I think that's even like a mischaracterization that
that's
Carlton
not even right.
and Damon are saying. Like, he was really just saying, like, I'm not like cool with this father as a character not caring about his son being kidnapped. I'm like, that's really even, it's not even that, he was asking for too much more screen time and everything like that. It was literally like, it doesn't seem like it's in character for me to not care about my son being kidnapped. And it in some ways, like, furthers harmful narratives. And it really is Damon and Carlton that are like, he called us racist, so we fucking fired his ass.
The article kind of jumps around, but here it gives some examples of the actual racist jokes that were made. The only one I think I can read is when actor Adewale Akinowe Abaje's picture was on the writer's room table. Someone was told to remove their nearby wallet before he steals it.
I mean, yeah, again, this is just the kind of thing I feel like that was meant to, like, that was this kind of like, we all have balls, and we're in this writer's room, and nobody gets offended at anything. You know what I mean?
Now, Jack, let me ask you, like, do people in Hollywood think people with, like, normal jobs are like this at work?
No, I think that's the whole point. Is that we don't have a normal job, and what we do is different, and we're artistic and creative, and we don't get, or at least the opinion back then was like, we don't get offended, and like, this kind of stuff, like, we don't care about or whatever. Now, it's not the case anymore, but I think it's just as phony now as it was then. You know what I mean? Like, now I think people are on guard to show that they're the most offended by things, because that's kind of just, it's all about what's on vogue in the moment. It's really all that it is.
And when it was time to kill off Adewale's character,
Mr. Echo,
here is something here is Carlton Cuse's first draft for the idea. Carlton said something to the effect of, "I want to hang him from the highest tree. God, if we could only cut his dick off and shove it down his throat."
Yeah. So this is basically, I think, because the guy that played Mr. Echo wanted to leave the show, and so they were like mad that he wanted to leave the show. So they were trying to be, oh, we're so pissed off about this. And then they also, this is a black writer talking about this. They basically suggested, pretty vile lynching imagery.
That's lynch. That's lynching. That is that is what lynching was. That's literally what happened to Emmett Till. Like, that's what it is. It's the mutilation and the hanging.
I should confirm this, but I'm like, I think he maybe does end up hanged in the show, actually.
Damon Lindelof. Oh, now he's not the one who made the comment. All right, he's not the one that made the comment, so he's not responsible for it. But if he knew about that comment and then went on to make Watchmen, Whew, the hubris of it.
I think he was probably in the room, when all this happened. And yeah, I think that in some ways, again, this is Chameleon Man. This is Mr. Chameleon Man. But yeah, so and I think also what Owosu Breen, this is one of the writers who's quoted for the article, and she's a black writer.
And she's a showrunner herself now. She's like a pretty big deal now herself.
I think she speaks to kind of, like what the ethos was of writers' rooms at the time. She says, she talks about how she was a showrunner. She's apologized to people because the stress makes, does bad thing, makes you, mean to people. But she says about the Lost Room, but this was racism. I don't know. That doesn't feel like the kind of thing that just happens when you're stressed. There was a blood sport aspect to how that room functioned. Owusu Breen said of her choices on Lost consisted of, I become a dick and start making jokes at people's expense, or I'm the humorless fuck who no one could have fun around. And I think that actually does speak to, like the psychology of what was going on in writers' rooms around that time. Is that it was a, we're all friends. It was like a way of showing that you're all friends in some weird way. And it was like the more extreme you could be, the more funny you were and the more things didn't matter to you, and if you pushed back on that or didn't like it, then you were like a wet blanket,
Yeah. A friend of the show appears in the article. Javier Grillo Marcho, who's a writer, still going strong out there past this. He quit Lost in the second season because he was tired of this bullshit, and he gives a story that kind of just encapsulates the whole kind of mentality that was going on behind the scenes. He says it was a predatory ecosystem with its own carnivorous megafauna. I love that line. Like, he's a good writer. I can tell he's a good writer just for that, from how he's describing how shitty Lindelof and Hughes were. Here's a quote from the article. 2 years of what could be called the Tallahassee mentality was enough for him. The term comes from characters on the show poking fun at the Florida city. One day, the Lost offices got a letter from the mayor of Tallahassee, who gamely invited the show's personnel to visit and enclose brochures touting the city's attractive qualities. Pause here. That is normal. That happens all the time. That is like, towns wait for those sorts of things to happen so that they can do this. This always happens. There's nothing like wrong with this, okay? Back to the article. In response, and this is a quote from Javier, in response, Damon told the writer's room to double down on Tallahassee, and when asked why, he replied with a straight face that the only thing funnier than punching someone in the face for no reason is punching them harder when they ask why. If you can imagine that as a management philosophy, you can understand what it was like to work on Lost.
Yeah, I do think that that's illustrative. In some ways I'm like, I don't really care about the Tallahassee poking or whatever, but I do think,
but it's like the mindset.
Yes,
like, if that's your mindset,
yes, I do think that that's a real mindset too. And yeah, I do think, yeah, I buy that. I buy that completely.
That's just bizarre.
Yeah, like Damon also just like seems out of his depth and does buy the bullshit about what a genius he is. There's a later part of the article here that says an editor once made a minor suggestion regarding a story, and according to a Lost employee, Maureen will call Seamus, Lindelof made it clear her job would be in danger if she ever did again. She wrote an almost offensively effusive mea culpa letter. I'm so sorry, Seamus said. Offering storytelling input to Lindelof, Seamus observed, was an absolute no-fly zone. I think that a lot of times, what happens too is that these people become like little tyrants of their own kingdom and do really buy the bullshit. Like everybody was writing about what a genius Damon is, and Damon's response is kind of like, maybe I am. Maybe I am a genius.
Yeah, the article continues with, the torment of these poor writers that, was coming from Lindelof and Hughes. Even when the people start to kind of get turned on the show, I think around maybe season 5, and we're not too into some of the later episodes, One came out called Eternal, which I guess was very popular, right? If it's like one, people consider it like one of the best. So these two writers, I guess junior writers, what is the job? What's the job you give for the writers who aren't considered important because they don't even get like in the credits a lot of the time?
That's just basically called a staff writer. You know what I mean?
Staff
Like
writer.
you are in the room, you're helping to like put it together, but unless you actually get the byline on an episode script, your name doesn't really appear in the written by.
Well, these two writers did get bylines on this one script for this episode that all the fans love,
And it turned out not to be a good idea.
which was a bad idea. You never want to do that. You never want to be too good at your job. And Lindelof and Hughes were pissed, like pissed about this for some reason. First of all, they took credit for it. One of the writers overheard Hughes in the other room telling an actor, "Oh yeah, I wrote this particular line. I wrote most of the script."
Yeah.
Which is a completely lie. And then they, at one point, and I'll read this quote because it's just insane. It's just about the insanity of their mindset. At one point, the Ab Aeterno saga took a turn for the ridiculous. I wouldn't use the word ridiculous here. I would say like dark and sociopathic, but you know, that's the writer there. Hughes and Lindelof called Nations and Husu Taylor into a room, and she recalled that they basically told us how much we owed them for letting us have our names on that script. And they implied it would probably be good if we got them a little present. So Sue Taylor went out and bought gifts for her bosses. She can't recall what she got Lindelof, probably something Star Wars related, given his love of that franchise. She says she brought Swarovski pencils for Hughes.
Yeah. I will say that I do think the gift giving especially rings so familiar to me.
Jack, are you fucking
the weird
your
culture,
bosses?
The weird culture of the expectation of buying a gift for the richest people in the room to basically show your appreciation for that they let you work for them is real.
God damn. That's what the fuck?
It's real. That's real. That's real.
That's insane.
Hollywood gift culture is something that, as someone who was an outsider and was in for a moment, I truly found like insane.
Lindelof's response, he had two different responses from when she talked to him. In the original quote, he's kind of talked in broad terms. You know, what I saw in this business around me was toxicity, you know? And so I was like, it's okay, as long as there is one or two writers who don't look exactly like me, then I'm okay. I came to learn that was even worse. For those specific individuals, forget about the ethics or the morality involved around that decision. He's trying to dance around the fact that he's admitting to tokenism, like the hiring tokens. But just talking about the human effect of being the only woman or the only person of color and how you are treated and othered, I was a part of that. 1,000%.
And so here's the thing about this is that, like, so what he's done, and this is why people now are like, you know, he's good now. He did Watchmen. I'm like, so what he did now was remained the boss, but like did kind of more tokenism. You know what I mean? Like
Yes.
He was like, you know what I need to do is like, what'll really be good is I'm still the boss, and it's like now 3 white writers and 7 black writers, and now I'm like, you know, really doing good.
Yeah, I even think Watchmen, I can't even think of a white writer on Watchmen. I may be wrong about this, but like all the ones I can recall off the top of my head are black. But yes, he was in charge and he made a lot of the decisions, again, that we talked about on watching Watchmen that kind of, you know, suggested that maybe this guy wasn't quite as, I don't know, racially conscious as all the TV critics in the world.
I know one other writer on Watchmen who is a white guy.
Who?
Nick Hughes, Carlton Hughes' son.
Oh my goodness. Article doesn't mention that for some reason. Article doesn't bring that up, I don't think. So, and when she spoke to him later and she had, you know, all these quotes about specific racist shit that he had done and said, including the quote about firing Harold over because I fired his ass. He says this is Damon's, you know, response to that direct quote from 2 different sources. What can I say other than it breaks my heart that was Harold's experience, replied Lindelof, who said he did not recall ever saying that. And again, people said he said that multiple times, not once. He loved saying it, but he says
one of the
he
jokes
never
he
said
did.
it.
He does do the modern guy thing where he's like, and I'll just see that they happened 17 years ago, and I don't know why anyone would make that up about me. You know what I mean? Like, this is really the difference between the Carlton and Damon responses. And Damon is like, I don't want to deny lived experiences, and I'm listening and learning. And Carlton is like, I flatly rejected any of that happened and speak to my attorney.
Yeah, one denial that Lindelof makes directly that cannot be believed is that he never threatened anyone's career. Like, I just do not. I don't know if any showrunner could actually say that.
In some ways, I think that he might believe that because he'll probably be like, I was joking. You know what I mean? Like, yeah. I think for him, he's like, it was a joke. It was like a mean joke. But yeah, if your boss is like, hey, you're never going to work again, fucker. You know what I mean? Then you're kind of like, seems like he's saying I'm never going to work again, you know? People like to thread like right in the middle where they're like, that's a joke, but it's kind of serious. But I get to sort of emotionally feel like it was a joke.
Yeah, and you better take it seriously.
Yeah.
All right, folks, we've done enough. That's enough of a deep dive. Thank you so much for joining us today. Again, I highly recommend the article. I'm excited. I really want to check out this book. I think it's very interesting. This is the book. This book should come out every year, right? Like, if you have this, like, this should be just like, we should just have an annual, like, write-up.
It does seem like it's not topical and that it's going to be like a, sort of, because I mean, even Lost is not really that topical. You know what I mean? Like, yeah. I think this is kind of about, the way things were and if they've changed. And my big contention is that things haven't changed and that people are still just doing it out of like what they think is popular.
All right, folks, that was Struggle Session. Thank you so much for listening. Have a good one. Peace.
Later.